All right, hello everyone. So let's move on into chapter 20 now. So we're going to talk about gastrointestinal disease. Primarily that would be food and waterborne disease. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of background here. Now, we've all heard people talk about food poisoning. It's probably a good chance you've had food poisoning at some point. Food poisoning, note this phrase is in quotes. It is caused by any number of microbes. It can be bacteria, viruses, protozoans, and the poisons, the toxins they produce. Food poisoning and gastrointestinal diseases in general, almost always the portal of entry is oral. It's an oral route for the portal of entry. In the United States, there are about 76 million or so cases of foodborne illness per year, and that's conservative. It'd probably be a lot more than that. 14 million can be attributed to known pathogens. Over 300,000 hospitalizations and about 5,000 deaths per year. Why did I say that 76 million is a conservative estimate? Well, a lot of these go undiagnosed. If you had food poisoning, did you go to the hospital for it? You may have, but a lot of people don't because it kind of clears up on its own relatively quickly. So, authorities wouldn't know about it. Worldwide diarrheal diseases are very common. It's usually caused by poor quality food or water, and diarrheal diseases are the leading cause of adult death worldwide and the second leading cause of childhood death. Again, second only to respiratory illness in children. All right, what about signs and symptoms of food and waterborne illnesses? The most common signs and symptoms are the following. So you have headache, diarrhea, abdominal pain, nausea, fever, chills, vomiting. All right, she doesn't look happy over here. Okay. Less common is going to be more specific to the microbe causing the disease. So some pathogens produce very unique signs and symptoms like excessive, bloody, and/or explosive diarrhea, none of which you want, particularly pleasant. Even kidney damage, neurological issues, and death. What's the main treatment here? The biggest thing is replacement of lost fluids. Okay? Diarrhea kills by dehydration. You lose too many fluids. So replacement of lost fluids and electrolytes. And then maybe antibiotics and anti-nausea medication. Okay? All right, let's look at causes. Bacterial causes of digestive illness. Okay, now an important distinction, everyone, you have to know is the difference between food intoxication and food infection. Food intoxication is caused by the toxins that the pathogen produced. All right, so many pathogens produce toxins that cause the disease. You do not have to actually have the bacteria in you, okay, to cause the disease. So it's not necessary that living bacteria are ingested to cause the disease, only that the toxin is present. So like it says here for this guy who also doesn't look happy, food intoxication can take place irrespective of the fact whether the microbes that produce the toxin are present in the food or not. Now, the thing about food intoxication, that's typically when people say, oh, I had food poisoning. It was probably food intoxication because the signs of the disease appear quickly. Within 1 to 8 hours after eating the contaminated food, that toxin can travel quickly and we're going to get signs and symptoms. Food infection is where the microbes themselves are actually growing inside the patient. So it's the microbe itself, not necessarily just its toxin, that's causing the problem. Now here it's going to take longer for the signs and symptoms to appear, 12 to 36 hours after eating the contaminated food. Okay, the growth of the microbe is going to take longer than just traveling of a toxin. Now, how about routes of entry? So routes of microbial contamination of food and water. Well, a big one is fecal contamination. It could be animal feces, potentially even human feces. So fecal contamination. A group of bacteria called fecal coliform bacteria are the most common problem here. They're also used diagnostically. Now, fecal coliform bacteria are gram-negative bacilli. So gram-negative little rods, little ovals. They do not produce endospores. They can use oxygen, aerobes, or they can be a facultative anaerobe, living with or without oxygen. They do ferment lactose. They break down the sugar lactose, producing both acid and a gas. See the yellow with the CO2 bubble here in the Durham tube. Now, E. coli, everyone, is a fecal coliform, and it can be used as an indicator of fecal contamination. So if we find E. coli in food or water, that is an indication of some kind of sewage or fecal contamination. If feces is present in food or water, there can be all sorts of pathogens, lots of them. But E. coli is a good indicator there. Now, of importance is this strain of E. coli. E. coli strain 0157H7. 0157H7. Here's the colony of it and under the microscope. Now, recall that most strains of E. coli are harmless. They're fine. We use them in the lab all the time. Most are harmless. But this strain, 0157H7, is what's called a Shiga toxin-producing E. coli, STEC. It produces this Shiga toxin, which is very pathogenic, all right? It causes a food infection. So the E. coli is growing in the patient, and then it produces this toxin. This strain was first identified as a pathogen back in 1982 in contaminated beef. It causes bloody diarrhea and fever, and interestingly, in 5 to 10% of cases, so relatively small amount of cases, but still 5 to 10%, it causes what's called HUS, or hemolytic uremic syndrome. Okay? What is that? That's pretty severe anemia because red blood cells have been destroyed, along with some kidney failure and low platelet count. Most people do recover from it, but some will have lifelong kidney damage and death can result. All right? Okay. Another one here. Now remember, if we go back this way, everyone, we're looking at routes of microbial contamination of food and water. Animal or human fecal contamination, okay, is one. And then we looked at E. coli here as an example. Now, another one is salmonellosis, salmonella poisoning. Now, salmonellosis is the most common food infection, not foodborne disease overall, infection, not intoxication, food infection. It causes about 1.2 million illnesses, 23,000 hospitalizations, and maybe 500 deaths in the United States per year. And historically, the collapse of the Aztec culture in South America is probably at least partially due to a massive salmonella outbreak. Okay? Now, salmonellosis is caused by two types of bacteria, Salmonella enterica and Salmonella bongori. Okay? Diarrhea, fever, and abdominal cramps within 12 to 72 hours. Okay, remember, this is a food infection. The illness can last up to a week, perhaps a little longer, as few as 4 days. Most people do recover without treatment. Some require hospitalization. You might know that birds and reptiles naturally have salmonella as part of their normal microbiota in their intestinal tracts. So if they poop or you get some of that on your hand, that can be that fecal contamination. 1 in every 10,000 chicken eggs that you buy at the store have salmonella bacteria in or on them. So how do we prevent salmonella? Specific preventative measures. Cook poultry, beef, and eggs thoroughly. Don't eat or drink foods containing raw eggs or unpasteurized milk. Okay? And then for all types of this is wash hands. But specifically for salmonella, wash your hands after handling reptiles, birds, or chicks, and after any contact with pet feces. Okay? So salmonellosis, the most common food infection. So one route of entry here is fecal contamination. Another entry is food handler contamination. All right? So say at a restaurant or something. Now, this is typically caused by Staphylococcus. So you have staphylococcal food poisoning. Usually this species again, which we've seen many times, Staphylococcus aureus. Now, Staph aureus is the most common cause of food intoxication, not food infection, food intoxication. Staph aureus grows well under salty conditions. So foods like the sub, they're going to have salt added to them, but they grow poorly at cool temperatures. So proper refrigeration and freezing becomes very, very important. Now, another food handler contamination culprit is norovirus. Norovirus is the most common foodborne illness overall. So both food intoxication and food infection. It's the most common foodborne illness in the United States, and I think this image here captures it all. It doesn't matter what language you speak or where you're from. I think we get the idea what this is showing. Okay? 20 million cases per year. Examples that made the news. Cruise ships. Hundreds of people affected with norovirus on a Royal Caribbean cruise. Chipotle restaurant affecting people. And you see this in the news fairly often. Okay? So how you get norovirus from people or surfaces. Providing care, changing diapers, shaking hands, touching a contaminated surface, and then you touch your mouth, you get norovirus. Okay, so most common overall. A third portal of entry here is soil contamination. And the big culprit here is another Clostridium, Clostridium botulinum. Now, this is an endospore-forming bacteria, you can see the green here, that's highly pathogenic, okay? It can be found in canned foods because it prefers low acidity, sausage and other processed meats, and even other foods. Now, interestingly, nitrites will stop these endospores from germinating. So the endospores can't grow back into full bacterial cells. So nitrites are often added to foods to prevent that, especially these foods. Okay? What Clostridium botulinum causes is botulism. Now, this can be a dangerous situation here. You don't want botulism. That's much worse than your normal food poisoning, food intoxication, and most other food infections. Botulism is caused by a very potent neurotoxin released by this Clostridium. It initially causes vision problems like double vision, but can progress to affecting breathing, heartbeat, and then leading to death. It can take a long time to recover, many months of treatment and recovery, and can be particularly dangerous in infants because infants, especially very young infants, don't have to pick it up from eating food. They can get it from the environment itself. So you see here, 2016, 15, 14, 13, 12, total botulism cases. I can't remember where this data came from, but total botulism cases in a particular area. And then foodborne and that infant botulism here, some even from wounds. Okay? All right, the last gastrointestinal disease I want to talk about is hepatitis. Now, hepatitis, remember that itis, inflammation of. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver. Okay, hepa, referring to liver. Now, hepatitis is caused by at least 5 different viruses. You have hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, hepatitis D, and hepatitis E, and probably more that we don't know about yet. Now, keep in mind, the liver is not technically part of the GI tract. I mean, food doesn't go through it, but it is certainly a digestive organ, so we're going to cover it here. Now, I'm not going to cover all A through E, but we'll look at the first 3. Those are the most important. Hepatitis A is the least problematic. The route of entry or portal of entry is mucous membrane, so it's going to be an oral portal of entry. It's transmitted by contaminated food or water, fecal contamination, blood, or sexual contact. Half of cases are subclinical, nearly or completely asymptomatic, about a 4-week incubation period. Even if you do get symptoms, low-level symptoms last 2 to 20 days or perhaps months, but the good news is there is no chronic form. The bad news, the virus can survive for days on surfaces. Signs and symptoms include fatigue, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain or discomfort. Those are pretty standard for any GI disease. But more specifically, clay-colored bowel movements, very dark, loss of appetite, low-grade fever, and then dark urine, joint pain, and that yellowing of the skin and eyes we call jaundice. Remember, this is affecting the liver, okay? So here's some hepatitis A facts, how it's spread, okay? Some symptoms, and some other information. Not too serious, hepatitis A. Hepatitis B is a little bit more serious. The route of entry here is parenteral, typically through needles or sexual contact. It can also be transmitted indirectly, okay? It can be transmitted by contaminated blood, saliva, semen, vaginal secretions, but typically not feces or urine, unlike hepatitis A. Now, it can be subclinical, might be asymptomatic, but it could also go all the way up to severe liver damage. 5% of infections the person becomes a chronic carrier. It's going to have problems that crop up all the time, and many will die from liver cancer or cirrhosis of the liver. Here's your incubation time, 4 to 26 weeks. It's estimated that at least 1/3 of the world's population has had a past infection. But of interest to most of you, the incidence in healthcare workers is higher than the general public. On the plus side, there is a vaccine against it that's routinely given. Now, the last one I want to mention is hepatitis C. Hepatitis C is the most dangerous, the most concerning form of hepatitis. Now, the route of entry here again is parenteral or sexual. 80% or more of intravenous drug users are believed to be infected. It can also be transmitted by indirect contact, but here's the real problem. 85% progress to chronic hepatitis. Remember, only 5 here and none with hepatitis A. 85% progress to chronic hepatitis, and 25% of those develop liver cancer or cirrhosis. Hepatitis C, everyone, is currently killing more people in the U.S. than AIDS. All right? Often, no symptoms appear for many, many years. That's another issue with trying to treat it. A new but expensive drug can clear the infection, but it's not commonly known or used. Finally, how can we keep food and water safe from contamination? Well, everyone, a lot of this is just common sense, okay? Wash your hands and surfaces. Separate foods to avoid cross-contamination. cooking to proper temperature, and definitely proper refrigeration. So as this message says here, fight back, and notice it's BAC for bacteria, not BACK, fight back, you get it? I thought it was clever. All right, so it's telling you what to do here to fight back bacteria. Okay, everyone, that's it for this chapter on gastrointestinal diseases. Certainly not exhaustive, but gives you a good idea: food intoxication, food infection, what food poisoning means, and what's hepatitis. All right, next time we're going to do our last chapter, which looks at the diseases of the skin, nervous, and genitourinary systems. Okay? So until next time, have a nice day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.